Research and development. Or R&D benefits business, communities, and the broader Australian economy. R&D creates new knowledge, technology, and processes, and is important for helping companies to grow and succeed. Companies take pride in their R&D. The Research and Development Tax Incentive, or R&DTI, is a way for the Australian government to encourage companies to do R&D by providing a tax offset to conduct R&D that they might not otherwise conduct due to risk or uncertain returns. The R&DTI is an incentive program that supports your company to invest more in eligible R&D activities. For R&D conducted from 1 July 2021, the R&DTI offers different tax offset rates depending on your company's aggregated turnover. If your company's annual aggregated turnover is less than $20 million, the refundable offset rate is equal to your company tax rate, plus a premium of 18.5%. If your company's annual aggregated turnover is $20 million or more, you may receive a non-refundable offset rate equal to your company tax rate plus a premium. The premium has two tiers and is dependent on the incremental intensity of your R&D expenditure. Incremental intensity is measured by your R&D expenditure as a proportion of your total expenditure for the year. For R&D expenditure up to 2% of your total expenditure for the year, you will receive a premium rate of 8.5%. For an additional R&D expenditure above 2% of your total expenditure for the year, you will receive a premium rate of 16.5%. The R&DTI is more than a financial support program. Registered research service providers provide an opportunity to collaborate with research partners. The types of R&D that are eligible are set out in the laws that underpin the program. If your R&D activities meet the program criteria, you can claim the tax offset. The R&DTI is a self-assessment program. This means you must determine if your R&D activities are eligible according to the legislation before you apply to register for the program. You can even check if your R&D activities are eligible before you conduct or plan to conduct your R&D activities. Eligible R&D activities are activities where the outcome of the R&D can't have been known or determined in advance. Eligible R&D activities are also carried out in a scientific way, with the aim of generating new knowledge. We expect you to keep records to show that your R&D activities meet the legal requirements of the program. You should consider registering for the R&DTI if you're an incorporated company, you conduct or plan to conduct at least one activity that meets the program definition of a core R&D activity, you have eligible R&D expenditure greater than $20,000, or have engaged a registered research service provider to do your R&D. For more information on eligibility and how to apply, visit our website or call the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources.
To these emails of people that register, but I know that they are not present. Yeah.
So that's a pretty good little summary for what the R&DTI is all about. The important thing to remember is that the Research and Development Tax Incentive Program is a research and development grant. It's not actually a tax program. It's just that it's jointly administered through Department of Science, Innovation, Industry, and the ATO, and the way in which the funds are transferred to R&D organisations is through the ATO. So it's actually a program about funding R&D, which I think that sort of indicated pretty strongly. So the R&DTI is claimed by about 15,000 companies across Australia every year. Do you want to go to the next slide? About 2,000 of those turn over more than 20 million, which is one of those thresholds that we indicated. So the vast majority of businesses are turning over less than $20 million. And of course, the larger amount of the benefits are for those organisations as well. And those organisations under 20 million can receive the money back as a cheque cut by the government, somewhere between 43.5 cents and 48.5 cents on every dollar spent on R&D, the government will cut you a cheque on the difference between what you might have paid tax if you're in profit. But if you're not, then it's just cash back from the government. And the government, the program itself supports around about $16 billion worth of R&D around the country and costs the government about $3.1 billion. So it's a pretty expansive program. One of the interesting things I think is that Australia, and one of the reasons why R&D Certainty, our business, me and my partners, was created in the first instance, is that Australia is underrepresented in relation to businesses getting or taking advantage of the R&D subsidies that are available. Our business expenditure in research and development, which is called BIRD, is very low compared to most OECD countries. I think we're sort of, you might know the exact number, but I think we're in the late 20s or 30 or something like that. The top country around the world, I think, is Israel, Korea. They're around about 4%. We're about 0.8% or something like that, which is pretty pathetic. So we as an organisation thought, well, how do we actually shift and change that? So in addition to trying to run business, we're also trying to do things like this. So I come out here to the NBI once every month and I spend half a day here to help organisations access the R&DTI. It's completely free of charge. We're not charging for any of that sort of thing. It's only if you want to keep working with us that there might be some fees involved. So that's all about education, which obviously this session is all about as well. Letting people know that it's available, giving some ideas about how it can be accessed, and encouraging you to access it if you can. So we'll just go to the next slide. So I think these sorts of numbers we've already talked about. So unless anyone's got any questions about that, I want to get through these slides pretty quickly, because basically all I'm doing is going over some of that information, but giving you some time to digest it, because it's an awful lot of stuff in that 3.5 minutes, I can tell you. But anyway, as long as you've got expenditure in excess of $20,000 related to R&D activities, you're eligible to claim in the program. Anything less than $20,000, you can't do that. But as long as you're spending more than $20,000 on R&D, you can get access to the program. You have to be it has to be through a company that's liable to pay tax in Australia. And you have to at least have one activity that, under the definition of the program, is a core activity, and we'll go through what a core activity is in a minute. So there's some awesome resources available from the government. You just saw that great little video, 3.5 minute video that they did. But also on this document here, through that, and I'm assuming we can send out this presentation to everyone as well, so that you've got some notes, so you don't actually have to take any notes from that presentation. Other than if you ask a question, I'll give you an answer that you like. So that link goes to this particular document here. This is the R&D Tax Incentive Guide to Interpretation. So I'm trying to, how many pages that document is? It's about a 40 page document. And it's a lot of detail in that document. And it basically tells you almost everything you need to know in relation to the way in which to put together an R&D application, or to register your R&D through the Oz Industry Portal. So it's a great document. But some of the stuff is a little bit tricky to navigate around. So that's why businesses like mine exist. That's the other point as well. If it's less than $20,000, there's still an opportunity to access the R&D tax incentive program. You need to do that through a registered service provider like CRCs or universities. But you still need to go through the same process of creating a core activity and then having those expenses claimed, but that can be less than $20,000 in that particular instance if you're using a registered research service provider. You can claim activities overseas if they're being undertaken as part of your R&D. The process is quite a lot more difficult to do. You have to go through what's called an advanced overseas finding to do that. Which means that Oz Industries is being invited in to audit your program. I've got another little slide here that talks about the number of applications that are actually audited. The video mentioned it's a self-assessed program. So when you go into the Oz Industry Portal and you register your R&D activities, you get your registration number. you put that registration number together with your scheduled list of R&D expenses with your account, lodge your tax return, get your money back. Only 1 to 2% of all applications that are submitted through Oz Industry are actually audited. So it is a self-assessed program. Not too many companies are audited, although, and they've got a little random generator that determines whether or not you get audited or not. And there's obviously a few things that if you do, you might heighten your odds. I don't know what those are generally, but I do know that software is certainly one that they are focusing on a little bit. That's not a problem. 80% of our clients are software-related claims. Where was I going with that? Oh, the advanced overseas finding. So what you do, you basically invite an audit when you do an advanced overseas finding. What that means is it becomes quite a lengthy process that can take up to a year to get some resolution in relation. It could take longer if you're in dispute with your activities with Oz Industry, and there's a whole series of different processes that you go through to get a final determination. But even getting to the end of the Oz Industry process could take up to a year. The real key issues in relation to overseas activities as well is that 50% of your R&D eligible expenses must be in Australia to allow you to even claim any overseas activities. And the other thing that's super important to understand if you're going to claim overseas activities is that the only way you can claim overseas activities if they could not have been undertaken in Australia. It's a big hurdle to jump over. You need some very good evidence to be able to describe back to Oz Industry exactly why the activities had to occur overseas and could not have been undertaken in Australia. So, for example, given that we do a lot of software claims, because software developers in Philippines or Ukraine or wherever they might be in the world are cheaper than the developers here in Australia is not a good reason for Oz Industry for you to claim that. So the fact that it's better for your business and it's cheaper for you to get it done overseas, that's not acceptable as a reason to claim them. So we need to find out other reasons, and it's skill sets or other reasons why they can claim. So eligible activities are core activities and supporting activities. You have to, as I mentioned before, you have to register at least one core activity, and supporting activities are optional. We'll go through exactly what they are in a minute, but supporting activities exactly as the word would suggest. They're in support of your core activity, basically. And we'll go through what all that stuff means in a bit more detail in a minute. So that's just, if you go to the next slide, that's just the way in which a project might be set up. Next one. So you've got an R&D project that could have multiple core activities attached to it, and then you could have multiple supporting activities that either support all of your core activities or individual core activities. And I won't go into any more detail on that one, I don't think. So we'll go over to the next one. Core activities, it's interesting that, and there's the plays on words throughout the legislation that's worth sort of talking about. A core activity doesn't need to be core to your business. It's just a word that they use in relation to the legislation. We'll talk about what that needs to be. It needs to be conducted for the purpose of generating new knowledge. The whole program, the most important takeaway in relation to the program is that it's all about supporting R&D activities that are generating new knowledge. And that generation of new knowledge can't be new knowledge that could have been determined in advance by a competent professional in the field, or competent professional with similar expertise or wherever. The only way in which you can generate new knowledge in accordance with the program is based upon a systematic progression of work based on the principles of science, which is essentially you've got to undertake an experiment, observations, analysis, conclusions, create a hypothesis, check how all that works, and then go again if you need to. So that's the very core of what a core activity is all about. Supporting activities must have a direct, close, and relatively immediate link to the core activity. If they are in an excluded category, so the way in which the R&D program works is that there are some activities that are excluded in relation to the program. We'll go through a list of those in a minute. So if it's on the excluded list, or if the supporting activity is directly related to producing a good or a service, and you receive some sort of return from that. So in other words, it has multiple purposes, so to speak. Then you have to demonstrate what's called dominant purpose of that supporting activity. So it just means that the dominant purpose for undertaking that supporting activity is to support the core activity. So there's a number of activities that might have more than one purpose, and obviously generating revenue is a big one. And most of our clients where we are looking at their supporting activities, they're related to producing a good or a service at some point in the future, or even during the process of undertaking that supporting activity, they're earning revenue. And so if they're doing that, then we need to demonstrate something called dominant purpose. Dominant purpose test has two main issues attached to it. The first thing is that it's about doing something differently, which is what you would expect. If you're undertaking some innovation or some R&D, you'd be doing something differently than what you would normally do, well, to generate new knowledge. So doing it differently, and that it has to have an inherent risk attached to it, which is obviously the purpose of the whole program, is to support businesses that are undertaking, risky type work. And there's a number of tricks around dominant purpose, which I won't go into now. That's sort of a long conversation. So this is basically lifted straight out of the legislation, section 355(25)(1), which basically describes what a core activity is. And those are the exact words in the legislation. Outcome cannot be known or determined in advance on the basis of current knowledge, information, and experience, but can only be determined by applying a systematic progression of work. That one is based on principles of established science, and two proceeds from a hypothesis to experiment. Observation, evaluation leads to logical conclusions. And B, that are conducted for the purpose of generating new knowledge, including new knowledge in the form of new or improved materials, products, devices, processes, or services. And it's that part that's really important in understanding the form of the new knowledge in which can be generated. It can be a material, a product, because most people think about it as being products or devices. Even materials, I guess, but processes and services are the really interesting one. I think that people probably don't think that there might be new knowledge attached to those things. I think about, well, R&D is producing a widget of some description, but it's not necessarily. Some types of activities are excluded, I mentioned before, so we'll go across to the other one. So this is section 355(25)(2). So these are what's known as the excluded activities in the legislation. Market research, market testing, or market development is you're not allowed to do research on those elements. You might recall that in talking about supporting activities, or maybe not, I don't know whether I mentioned it or not. Each of these excluded activities can be supporting activities, but they can't be core activities, okay? So even though they're excluded, doesn't mean they're excluded, if that makes sense. Prospecting, exploring, and drilling for minerals and petroleum for the purpose of discovering and evaluating deposits. Years ago, a big proportion of a bird in Australia was obviously undertaken by the mining industry, so they decided to exclude that, as you would expect the government to do. The main view of that, though, was that it wasn't really about generating new knowledge, but there was a really interesting court case some years ago called Morton Resources, which put that one to test somewhat. So there's components of it that you can still navigate around, even though it might be part of the mining industry. Sea management studies or efficiency surveys. And D is the big one, the one that most people find themselves getting a bit stuck in or trapped in is research in social sciences, arts and humanities. Because there's an awful lot of really awesome research that's being undertaken in lots of fields covered by social sciences, arts and humanities, and sometimes they get trapped. Often they get trapped by Oz Industry. If Oz Industry are undertaking an audit, they will almost always, at least in the first instance, ask some questions around whether or not the activity that you're undertaking is being excluded by 355(25)(2)(D, which is that one. A and C are also elements that get trapped frequently. Oz Industry's interpretation sometimes of some of these issues can be quite broad. So the ability to refine the message and refine some of your activities is really important, to make sure that it gets rid of some of that ambiguity that might exist between what you're trying to do and how it might be interpreted by us industry. But as I say, that's sort of one of the reasons why we as an organisation exist anyway, to help people do that. Commercial, legal and administrative aspects of patent and licensing or other activities. I think I've talked to a couple of people here already about patents. So the processes of, this is really just that final legal bit, administrative bit of creating a patent is excluded. All the other bits are obviously included. Activities associated with everything, testing, compliance, compliance with statutory requirements and standards. That's, I don't think I've even seen that one pop up in the work that we've done, but it does happen. Any activity related to the introduction of commercial product, process and plans or reverse engineering, and developing, modifying, customising computer software for dominant purpose used by the developer for its internal administration. That's one that also could potentially get caught up in Oz Industries net from time to time. But again, it's really just about being clear about what your activities are, being aware of these and making sure that you're navigating away from some of those things. There are some other exclusions as well that I haven't included here. The construction industry, which, you know, as you might have heard in the introduction, has been a big part of my life for a long time. Buildings as a whole can't be claimed. It's difficult to claim parts of buildings, but there are technologies within buildings that you can claim. So there is a number of those sorts of little elements that you need to sort of navigate as well, depending on where your expertise is and where your area of interest is and lies. Supporting activities, as I mentioned, they need to be directly related to the core activity. However, if the activity is excluded in that list, which I mentioned before, if it produces a good or a service, which we also mentioned, was directly related to producing a good or service, then we have to go through a dominant purpose test. So I mentioned before about the scientific method. That's a really core component of how the process works. And obviously the most important issue is that hypothesis and experiment analysis and conclusions component. The purpose is really your business and what it is that you're trying to achieve. So that's just saying basically the same thing. So what's the process of getting your R&D tax incentive? As I said, it's jointly administered. Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources was the old one. I think it's now Department of Industry, Science and Innovation, I think is the new name for that. I should have amended that. And the Australian Taxation Office. The way it works is that your R&D registration is done under the Aussie Industry component of it in the portal, and Aussie Industry will be, if they do an audit, will look at your claim for the purposes of Section 35525 and Section 35530, which is all the issues associated with core activities and supporting activities. So that's what they audit to make sure that you comply with the requirements of the legislation. Once you submit your application, as I said, very few will get an audit. You'll receive a registration number back when you've written them, generally within a couple of weeks. That happens. I've seen it happen a lot longer for some clients, but generally it's just a few weeks. You then use that registration number together with your schedule of R&D expenses, and together with your accountant, you lodge your income tax return, and then somewhere between 4 to 6 to 12 weeks, depending on where the government is in their processes, you'll get your check, you'll get your money back from the government, or your tax rebate, depending on where you sit in the hierarchy of turnover. Deadlines. So the end of your financial year. So some of our clients, that's from January to December. Most of our clients is the standard Australian tax year between July and June. The requirement is that you need to lodge for that income year at least 10 months after, anytime within 10 months after. The final date for lodgement is 10 months after. So the only thing that is available to you guys at the moment in relation to registering your R&D for financial year finishing FY22 is you need to actually register your R&DTI by the end of April 2023. So you've got quite a lot of time before you need to do that registration. But you need to register it before you can do your tax return and get your money back. So there's obviously there's an incentive to do it as early as you possibly can. As soon as you get your books in order or whenever your accountant is ready for that, to do that stuff, get straight on and get your money back as soon as you can. So for companies that had a tax year from January to December, their claim is the end of this month. So I'm busy at the moment with a couple of my clients trying to get their R&D plans and their R&DTI registration done by the end of this month. The other ones that are of interest is if you are going to do an advanced overseas climbing, you need to claim before the end of the financial year for activities that are undertaken overseas. So, for example, businesses that are on the July to June financial year that missed the window for FY22 for any advanced overseas planning they might need to have been done by 30th of June. But those that are on January to December have got until the 31st of December to submit their advanced overseas finding application. I have spent the last 2 years on New Year's Eve with my wife very angry with me, working through quite late, getting some advanced overseas findings applications in whilst everybody's partying around. So I expect that that'll happen again this year. That's okay. I just don't have New Year's Eve like everybody else, but that's no problem really. So those are sort of the deadlines that you need to be aware of in relation to that stuff. I think that's all covered. Record keeping, really, really important part of everything to do with your R&DTI claim. So record keeping will start from an evidence base for your new knowledge generation. So once you've been able to articulate what your new knowledge is, you need to then demonstrate why an expert, competent professional couldn't determine that new knowledge in advance. So, for example, to give you an example, I'm going to write a computer program and it's going to do something better, more improved, faster than someone doing it manually. So if I write in there, my new knowledge is I've written this computer program, hasn't been done before, and the end result is that it's going to be faster than a human doing it. That's not new knowledge. Oz Industry will say, absolutely not, you're out. So, but why? No one's ever done it before. Well, the reality is that just because it hasn't been done before doesn't satisfy the requirements of new knowledge. And a competent professional in computer programming could have said, well, of course, if you did a computer program X, Y, and Z, it's going to be faster than doing it manually. Easy. So how do you get around it? Well, the way you get around it is by determining how much better. So if you're able to put some real metrics there in relation to speed or performance or whatever, you've got to be careful too with computers in particular, because as soon as you don't want someone to say, yeah, all you have to do is upgrade your computer or upgrade your software. You don't want that. You need to be very specific technically around what those improvements are. And if you're able to therefore say, well, I'm going to find out exactly what those improvements are. Nobody can tell me. I've asked people, I've done all the research, literature reviews, everything else. There's nothing out there that can tell me how much better this is going to be. Then that becomes new knowledge. So the new knowledge itself can be quite trivial, really. And even if you've got a number of processes, you say, well, I'm going to go and speak to an expert in the field and say, I've got process 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Which one's better? Well, how do you determine better? Well, determine better by accuracy, reliability, etc., etc., etc. All right, so I've got some metrics, know what the measurements are. Which one is better? Well, nobody knows. Doesn't matter who I ask, which one's better, no one can tell me. The only way to actually work out which one's better is to do an experiment. Bang, you've got new knowledge. So it doesn't have to be, as I said, it doesn't have to be core to your business, which we mentioned before, and it can be somewhat trivial, but as long as you're generating new knowledge and it's to your benefit, not someone else's. So you can't be claiming on the R&DTI if the IP belongs to somebody else. So you can use the same project. So for example, I have lots of clients that are doing work for clients, their clients, and that their clients might be doing an R&DTI application. So they'll be claiming new knowledge on their application. Doesn't mean we can't claim on the same project. We just need to find some new knowledge that's different to that one, if you know what I mean. So as long as the new knowledge is different, then you can both claim, both the proponent and the client. anyway, there's a lots of little things like that that are worthwhile talking to. The other issues in relation to record keeping, obviously, is your expenses, time. You need to be able to demonstrate. ATO are the big one when it comes to eligibility of expenses. As I said before, Oz Industry are interested in the R&D, so they're interested in looking at your core activities and your supporting activities and determining whether or not they are in accordance with sections 355.25 and sections 355.30 of the legislation. The ATO are interested in whether or not your expenses are eligible. There are a list of eligible expenses, and obviously there are lots of ineligible expenses. So things like accounting fees, lawyers' fees, the patent stuff that we talked about before, specifically excluded, that sort of thing is ineligible. Obviously, time that your employers are spending or staff with you on activities that are not related directly to your R&D are not eligible. It's only the time that you spend on the R&D that's eligible. So you need to have really good record keeping in relation to both time and expenditure in all of those things. And then there's some really interesting ways of looking at some other expenses as well, particularly, you know, what I would call office type expenditure or even asset type expenditure. If you buy a piece of equipment and its only purpose is to support the R&D, then it's an eligible expenditure. If it can also be used to do other things and is also used to do other things, then you can only claim the time that's spent doing the R&D. So that is a general rule, goes for lots of different things, whether it's car use or office use or other pieces of equipment. And timesheets is the big one, is to make sure that, you know, when you're doing timesheets that or allocating time, that it's done in a way that you can actually demonstrate or have an evidence base. These are the sorts of things you need to talk to your accountant about anyway. But if you've been through some of these exercises before, sometimes the ATO might allow you to proportion expenses if you've got like a logbook you have for your car. So you have like a 3-month log of what you're doing for your car, and they allowed you to do that for the year. Anyway, so same is true, I think, for time and expenditure. But again, check with your accountant on those issues. And that's it. So there's no questions that came through that. Does that mean you all understood, or that I just did a really good job of explaining it, or I did a really bad job of explaining it, so therefore you're completely befuddled and have no idea, don't even know what to ask me?
Yes. You're saying you can claim for certain sorts of purchases and things like that.
Yep.
Experiment. What about going and renting a facility? So you can take an experiment.
Yes. As long as its only purpose, its sole purpose, is to support the experiment, yes, that's the answer. If you use it for other things, then obviously you need to go through a process of working out when was it used for R&D, when was it used for other purposes. But yes, if you can demonstrate that it's directly related to your experimental process and required for your experiment.
Renting it for that purpose, you're not doing anything else. That's it.
It's only that purpose, and without it, you couldn't have undertaken your experiment. Then you're good to go.
Okay. Thank you.
All of my financial advice, by the way, needs to be checked by an accountant. I'm not an accountant. Need to give up. I should actually have a little thing up here, a disclaimer, shouldn't I? Any advice that I give, you know, like they do with the people giving all sorts of investment advice, I've always got a disclaimer at the bottom of it saying, can't take anything that I say as being what I say. That's what
Do an accountant to do that.
Yeah, you do check with your
I mean, you're a bit of a fraud.
Yeah.
Thanks, Darren. Can you make a comment on solution 5B that could potentially be
It's not. No, it's not. And often you don't remember that the requirements of the program is to have a core activity and supporting activities, and to be able to describe what they are doesn't necessarily have to be at the very core of the IP that you've got. That, you know, is either associated with the patent or whatever it might be. You don't necessarily have to give up the details of it, but it is the program is it's not meant to get out basically any of that stuff. Yeah, it's not shared publicly. The whole purpose of the program is supporting businesses and helping businesses. So as far as I know, that should never get out. But the trick, as I say, is the way in which you create your R&D plans and the way in which you create your claim. You can probably steer it away from the important elements of what your IP might mean for somebody to then look at it and replicate it. You know what I mean? So, a number of different ways of tackling that.
Are you submitting your test reports and things with the client?
You don't have to. You have to submit your test results. So, in other words, you need to be able to describe as part of your. You need to be able to describe the systematic progression of work. But how much detail you put in that really only needs to be enough to satisfy Oz industry in particular that you've undertaken the work.
Oh, so it could just be, here's my thought points.
This is what I'm looking at. Yeah, this is what I've done. Bang, this is my hypothesis.
And there's my expenses as well.
Done. Yeah, yeah. Which goes to your question as well, right? It's really about how, because Oz industry honestly don't want all the information either. All they want to know is whether or not you've generated new knowledge and you've done that in a manner that's based upon a systematic progression of work based on principles of science. That's all they need to know. Now, they might come back, if you are audited, and ask you a few additional questions about some of that stuff, and then, you know, you work out, well, what do you actually need to know? And you can have, that's when you have those conversations with all the Oz industry as well around.
How basic can the project be? Like, can I design like a new avocado cutting tool or something into one-piece molding? There's always some at the market.
Yeah, as long as you're generating new knowledge of some description. So your avocado tool is doing it in a different way and in a way that couldn't have been determined by a competent professional. You had to undertake an experiment to work out whether or not it achieved, how much better it was than what's available, or you know what I mean, or whatever metrics that you are using. Yeah, as long as you could describe that process, and as long as that can't be challenged, so that you have to undertake an experiment to prove whatever it is that you're proving to generate the new knowledge. Yeah, yeah. As I say, that the way in which the it's interesting, particularly when you're talking to. I'm not saying that you know you guys are academics. I know one of you at least is an academic, but one of the interesting things is that the program doesn't necessarily support good science. There's a difference, right? So how important and all that sort of stuff, no, it's irrelevant. It's just supporting science. And it doesn't have to be good science. So there's an awful lot of stuff. It's completely eligible under the R&DTI. That if you put that in front of somebody that's, you know, within the academic sphere, they'll go, well, that's rubbish. I mean, honestly, the whole process is completely, I don't know, they're not doing it right. Doesn't matter.
What about that tooling part of it? So that machine or something.
Yep.
You make this avocado tool and you're going to make the machine that makes it.
Yep.
How much of that is part of it?
So anything that you, so if you need the machine, if you're making a machine to make the tool, as long as its purpose was to make the tool, so as long as it's in support of the experiment, because you're doing an experiment about the efficiency or the efficacy or the performance of the tool, and the machine was required to make the tool. If it had no other purpose other than to make the tool, then you don't even have an issue. If it has other purposes, then you need to get through the dominant purpose test. So in other words, what was done differently, what was the risk? So yeah, most of those things should be able to be claimed, and then you just need to navigate some of those legislative rules around that. So whether it's the dominant purpose test, whether or not the one we were talking about before about whether or not the asset has other is used for other things, it's basically the same issue. Yep. Yep.
I'm wondering if you had any experience working with new startups.
Yes.
who engage in the program. Specifically, kind of focusing the 20 startups that are bootstrapping themselves.
Yep.
Where obviously a lot of the investment is purely time.
Yep.
Founders, as opposed to startups who then go get funding, who then can demonstrate that they've got.
Yep.
Dollars.
Yep.
Do you have any experience with startups in those two different scenarios?
Yep. So, and it's kind of the purpose for us setting up here once a month and not charging anyone, right? Is to allow exactly organisations like that to get as much information as they need to allow them to access the program. I mentioned on one of those previous slides the guide to interpretation. That's an excellent document. But you know, when I'm here, happy to walk through the process with people. The way our fee structure works, which is kind of related to your question, for new startups, a lot of new startups, what I say to them is I put them onto the guide to interpretation, might have a little conversation with them around what their new knowledge generation is, etc. I then say to them, if you're able to do your application on your own, great. Otherwise, we can do that. We tend to do R&D plans. We don't do applications, but our R&D plans are created in such a way that they allow people to copy and paste out of the plan into the application portal, Oz Industry application portal. So what I say to new startups, if you're able to do all of that on your own, great. You create an application before you push the words, before you push submit, just go download a copy, send it to me, and I'll, you know, take an hour of my time to go through it, pull it apart, make sure it's in accordance with the program, in accordance with the legislation, point out what changes might need to be made to it to make it eligible, point out where the holes might be, and then, you know, you go off and fix those and push submit, and that's cheap.
Startups being engaged with projects successfully.
Yeah.
A couple of people working on it.
Yeah, no, I'm working with, I think, 3 or 4, 5 people or organisations exactly like that. And the only time I spend with them is an hour reviewing their stuff, and then I send them on their way and they get their money and away they go. Our business is set up, one of the other reasons why we set up our business is that because it's kind of why I made the comment at the beginning of this is not a tax program, it's actually an R&D program. And it's kind of gone the way of obviously an awful lot of accountants provide service. And so what happens generally is people look at it at the end of the financial year and try and cast back and say, all right, well, what have I done as far as R&D is concerned? In fact, that's the question the accountants ask. What R&D have you done in the last financial year? And then we'll pull together a program. Well, we can do that. We tend to do that for our first clients, but after that, we don't like to do it. What we want to do is at the beginning of the year to write an R&D plan so that you then know everything that you need to do for the next 12 months. You know what expenses you have got coming up. You know how to, or what time you need to log in and capture, what evidence base you require, what processes you need to go through. Everything is there. So at the end of the financial year, it's done and dusted. You've known what the purpose was, you've known what you're trying to achieve, you've collected all of your expenditures, all your evidence base, and you should be just ready to rock and roll and go in and get it all sorted easily.
It's related to that question.
Yeah.
Can you, if you're in that sweat equity type of situation, you're investing a lot of time, that's not paid, can you put that in as a business expense if there's a transaction taking place between the individual, the founder or another individual and the company?
Has to be, so it has to be actual expenditure. So which can take.
It's got to be cash.
Well, no, it could be.
You were selling stock, for example.
Yeah, it can take stock, loan agreements. There's a number of different ways, and as long as all of that is set up before the end of the financial year, and recognise these are the conversations for your accountant. But there is more than one way to look at that stuff. But generally speaking, there's either expenditure's been made or it's accepted that the expenditure's been made. So a loan agreement is really you've accepted that there's a debt that's there. Yeah. All right. Yep. And some other ways of doing it too, which we've talked to clients about, is they've done work for years and years and years, and they've created IP. So they go, well, now how do I actually capture all of the time and money and effort that I've spent in past years? You know, R&DTI came down, license the IP to your company. Might be another way of doing it. But again, these are things you do need to talk to your accountant about, but there are ways of capturing that stuff. And at the end of the day, it's all to do with being able to substantiate what you're doing as well, right? So whether or not it's the evidence base and the record keeping, that's what I keep going about, the record keeping, the documentation, all of that stuff is super, super important. So as long as you've got all of that well documented and it's understood by your accountant, that you've done it the right way, then there are a number of different ways to get around.
Probably a silly question, but I remember this. You know how does every R&D expenditure doesn't need?
Yes, everyone. So, yep. Yeah, CRCs can't make an R&DTI application. Your supporters can, as long as they are not, as long as they are registered for-profit organisations, then they can absolutely make an R&DTI application, but they have to make the R&DTI application. No, and the interesting thing with CRCs too is that because some of your supporters in the CRC may support you to a number less than $20,000 a year, that's on the good side. On the bad side, not bad side, on the it just is part of it. Because they've spent the money with you, doesn't mean they can claim on the R&DTI. They have to register a core activity, so they have to be creating their own new knowledge through the process. Right? And then the supporting activity to that core activity is the CRC.
So I don't know, but when we put the bid together,
yep.
You know, the industry partner on their cloud, that if they were of a certain size,
yep.
They would be able to have an benefit on the R&D.
Yep.
And that will go through our industry and
correct.
so
and
they can't do a core project with us, even though
they have
knowledge for them.
They can do the core project with you, yes. So you can do the core project for them, but it has to be their IP. So in other words, yeah, clear? Yeah, all right. Yeah. And then of course, then they just claim the expenses as part of the core activity. Yes. But as long as the IP or the new knowledge has been generated for their benefit, and they own that IP, then that's all good to go. But they have to register the application.
Yes, that's because no one told them that.
Yes.
At that time.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that I think
yeah, no, I think that's going to be circulated. And look, as I said, I'm here once a month, so you know we can have other chats about how do we set something up for your CRC supporters and for other CRCs, quite frankly.
Well, I think the way forward was at the CRC, because we wanted to provide some of our department is firstly to make them aware that that happened.
Yeah. And
secondly, make them aware of the timelines. Now, and then thirdly say, okay, now there's help available. You know.
Well, and I'm happy to do a similar thing for your partners as well. Really, it's not hard. You know, anytime you just let me know, I'll come down and I'll do a similar presentation, answer questions with your partners, and there might be something that pops out of that for you to be able to help them set all of these things up, and then you know,
so, I mean,
and I can help however you want me to.
Because we just
no, you've only just started. But the good thing for your timing, because you've only just, when did you start? August, didn't you? So the good thing with your timing, if there's nothing really that's been happening between then and the end of June, is we set everything up now for this financial year. And that obviously helps what you're doing as well as what your partners are doing as far as their R&DTI funds.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes.
What if the IP is in Creative Commons?
What we would need to do is the IP takes a number of different forms. So the new knowledge that we generate, as long as that new knowledge is not in contravention to the terms and conditions of the IP, and if it's Creative Commons, it's unlikely to. For everybody. Correct. So, but let's say even if there was a license, an IP contract that said you weren't able to use that IP, that doesn't mean that you can't produce or create new knowledge. It's slightly different to the IP, but using the principles of how you got to the IP, if you know what I mean.
You could register under it.
Yeah.
Which means essentially that person can benefit, doesn't really have any ownership.
No, it has to be for the benefit of the person actually creating. So
they would have
the new knowledge. Yeah, the new knowledge that you're creating for your benefit might be completely different to the IP, but all of the work that was undertaken to create the IP might be in support of that new knowledge generation. Does that make sense? So it's about how do you navigate around some of those aspects of the legislation. So the new knowledge that you generate has to be for your benefit, basically, what it's all about. And if you're able to do that through the processes of generating that IP and not be against the requirements of that IP license or contract, then you're good. You're good to go.
I'm looking at this one, I'm developing going to be produced by some company, or all of this pixel box and employee doing work.
Yep.
But it's my project.
Yep.
But I'm giving to it.
Yep.
I actually have no interest in visualizing.
Yep.
Whatever he does, he uses.
So he should be able to claim an R&DTI. Yeah, I would think so.
His employee to do the building, which is what I need.
Well, again, as long as he complies with those basic requirements of legislation, and there's at least one core activity, and it needs to be generating new knowledge, couldn't have been determined in advance. It has to be generated through a systematic progression of work based upon principal science. As long as it does that, and then supporting activities comply with 34530 and directly related, relatively immediate, in support of that core activity, which is an experiment, then. Yep.
It's about him taking that which is in the public domain.
Yep.
Being able to
Yep.
create it basically, because it's not in one place.
Correct.
Not really.
Yeah, and that's fine. He can use that IP as long as he's generating new knowledge that then is for his benefit.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. As long as it's different. And there's lots and lots of ways that you think about it from different angles. One of the fun things that we spend our time doing is trying to work with our clients about, well, what is the new knowledge? And particularly these clients that I've got, one in this district, as a matter of fact, within the Tonsley Coast, I've got lots and lots of clients that are doing all this innovative stuff. So we're trying to encourage their clients to come in the R&DTI with a piece of new knowledge, and they've got an experiment set up to generate that new knowledge. And then on this side, they've got all the processes to develop a widget or whatever it is. So they've just got to create different new knowledge, and so they've got all of their claims as well. So that can be tricky but fun.
This is set up ideas for experimentation.
Absolutely.
But it's got a huge application.
Yeah.
More than what it was developed.
Yeah.
So
Hence the reason why you should be able to generate lots and lots and lots of new knowledge.
that's what I'm struggling with, because I just need someone to build the thing.
Yep.
And I'm kind of at the moment figuring out what you said, that this is one pathway that I can explore to get that to happen. I don't want to really be my own company.
Yep. Yeah, well, all that means is that you can't claim an R&DTI.
No,
but they can. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the company that generates already.
Yep.
Well and truly within the form part.
Yep. Cool. Now, the other thing that you need to know is that I'm here every month for like 4 hours. I've got a little Calendly link that that NBI can send around, and just if you want to talk more, just book a time with me. And as I say, there's no fees associated with that bit. It's only when you ask me to go a bit further. And if you're smart, you'll see me every month. So you don't have to pay me anything. That's okay.
Available 4 hours.
Yes. Yes. So I'm still available now from now until about 3:30, I think it is. Three? Something like that. And I don't know whether these guys got the link to the calendar.
I'll send it out.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
So you can see me that I'm here for the afternoon.
but this afternoon, yeah, just booking in half an hour slots.
Yeah, half an hour. Yeah.
Sessions with him, so
Yeah.
he's kindly offering this for our members and the Chancellor community.
Yeah.
So thank you, Darren. Thank you also to Serena and Penelope for helping us organize this event today. We'll send out the slides and the link to the Calendly for booking the session. And just one more announcement. We have the City of Marion is offering the Father Business Mentoring Program. We still have a few slots available for general business, strategic marketing, and digital marketing. Also, if you have subscribed to our newsletter, there's a link there. But come to us and we can share that with you. Also, Flinders University is hosting with the Tonsley Future Energy Consortium, the Future Energy Week, the conference on the 10th and 11th of November. The website is futureenergyweek.com.au. So it will be great to see you guys there. So thank you to all those who attended, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.